that's your water. Okay, just have a seat. Hi, everybody. Martin Jean. I'm director of ISM. Welcome here in Miller Hall. Welcome here online. Very glad to have you all here for this year's Robert Tangeman Lecture in Sacred Music, which is named for a former professor of music at the Union School of Sacred Music and the late husband of one of our founding benefactors, Clementine Tangeman. And a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Phil Bohlman back here to the ISM. Phil and I go way back, so I hope you'll forgive me for waxing a little personal here. If I've ever done anything good at the ISM, I think the jury's still out on that. I credit Phil for so much of it because throughout these years, he has lent extensive counsel, wisdom, and friendship on so many of the big things that we've launched. I took this job on January 1st in a year that shall remain nameless because it was a very long time ago. And on January 2nd, I found myself on the campus of the University of Chicago meeting Phil in a campus dining hall. I don't know if you remember this, where we immediately started plotting the diversification of ISM's profile. It's true that ISM's longest standing work has been and will remain for years, some time to come, with Christian churches throughout the world, but our donors never intended we stop there. In fact, in our indenture, words to the effect that any sacred, artistic, or ritual practice broadly construed could be included in the work of the ISM. Phil was one of our first visiting fellows before we even had a program of visiting fellows. He was my first appointment to our advisory board. We haven't met in a little while, but we will soon again. He helped us develop the fellows program into what it is today. Many of its members here. He helped us identify Jeffers Engelhardt as a key partner. Jeffers was also a former fellow and a former visiting faculty here, but Jeffers is also editor of our Journal of Music and Religion, on which Phil is one of the founding editorial board members. On and on it goes. Phil was and remains to me to be one of the first people I go to ask opinions and get advice. And as long as he's willing to give it, I'm going to ask it. Enough about me, however. Here's more about Phil. Phil Bohlman is Ludwig Rosenberger Distinguished Service Professor of the Humanities and Music at the University of Chicago, Artistic Director of the new Budapest Orpheum Society, and Honorary Professor at the Hochschule for Music, Theater, and Media in Hannover, Germany. He is an ethnomusicologist, particularly interested in exploring the intersections between music and religion, race, colonial encounter, and music and nationalism. The study of Jewish music has been, in modernity, has provided a primary focus for his research over 4 decades. And since 1998, has provided the context for his activities as a performer because he is an amazing pianist, both as artistic director of the new Budapest Orpheum Society and in stage performances with Christine Wilkie Bohlman of Works for Piano and Dramatic Speaker, created during the Holocaust. I think both of these instantiations have come to Yale over the years. With the MBOS, Phil has released at least 4 CDs, maybe more, one of which was nominated for a Grammy Award. His work in historical performance has been recognized by the Noah Greenberg Award from the AMS, Donald Tovey Prize from Oxford University, and since 2008, Phil has been conducting research in India, especially in Kolkata, Varanasi, and rural West Bengal. He's authored and co-edited around 35 volumes of scholarship. I think that number is growing exponentially, and many dozens of book chapters and journal articles. With Federico Celestini, he is the co-editor of Acta Musicologica, the Journal of the International Musicological Society, and he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, corresponding fellow of the British Academy, and 2019 the Romanian National University of Music in Bucharest, awarded Phil the degree Doctor Honoris Causa. There is a library full of work and recognitions, but listing them will only take time away from our main task here today, which is to join Phil, this year's Tangeman lecturer, as he invites us to consider his reflections on journeying to the farthest places of worship, sonic encounters on sacred borderlands. Please welcome Philip Bohlman.
Thank you so much, Martin. Those are such kind words and kind memories, I must say, and I so appreciate your words. It's wonderful to be back here again, and I'm just thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to speak to you tonight, to share ideas with you. To be inspired by you, to be inspired by this place, to be inspired by the fellows and my wonderful colleagues and friends here at Yale and at the Institute of Sacred Music. I wanted to say just a few quick words of thanks for those who made this particular evening possible. And I'll start with John Bullock, who is here as a fellow and one of the as student, I would say former student and current teacher of mine. I really appreciate all that you did, John, to bring me here and to get me working this afternoon already teaching a class. Thanks to Eben Graves and Ray Vogel for all of the organizational work, which was above and beyond, and for better or for worse, it got me here. So I'm particularly thankful to them. And Martin Jean, I was here once before in Miller Hall with Martin, and it was 11 years ago. And I remember that there were leaks in the walls and the floors, and he brought us over to sort of with this excitement to show us this wonderful potential place. And there's a little bit of scratching of, if this possibility could ever be brought up to code. But of course, it's been brought up to just a beautiful facility and a place of ideas and sharing, and this is very, 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 very special. Martin is quite correct that we often, as in that moment when he opened the doors and led us into this, look at this building, what it can be. He's a person who deals in dreams, and he realizes those dreams, and I'm particularly appreciative of that. And Martin has this evening realized a dream for me, which was the opportunity to share with you my remarks in this Tangeman lecture. Thanks so much to all of you. I am particularly honored that the ISM Tangeman lecture has afforded me the possibility to gather ideas at the confluence of several of my current projects. I'm doing some things here, some older things, some new things, but some certain things for the first time, and I'm really pleased with that possibility. I need not remind my colleagues and friends at the Institute of Sacred Music that I have committed my research and also musical practice to the intersections of sound and the sacred, and I have done so globally. Together with my co-author and Chicago colleague, Anna Schultz, I have been bringing these ideas together in a book entitled Is All Music Religious? Sacred Music in World Religion, which Anna and I are writing for Cambridge University Press's Religion, Philosophy, and Society series. The Tangeman lecture further affords the opportunity to expand the foundational framework of the 5-year project supported by funding from the International Balzan Prize, which I received this past autumn, a project called Borderlands of Sonic Encounters. And you see this already, and I'm playing with it in my subtitle here, and I'll be playing with it all evening. The borderlands that young scholars working with the project are ethnomusicological in the fullest sense: geographic, historical, aesthetic, and musical, sonic, and sacred. How fortunate I am that the Tangeman lecture allows me to seize the opportunity of first exploring the sonic and the sacred borderlands in the august setting of the ISM. Finally, the Tangeman lecture is that very special moment in which I am able to do what I believe I have always done best, the intellectual practice most meaningful to me: listening to, interacting with, and learning from my students from many years. It is surely not by chance that those former students who are here this evening have themselves traversed sonic and sacred borderlands, and it will be my privilege to reflect upon their work, from which I continue to learn so much. Before I turn to the main body of my talk this evening, I should say a few words about organization and about the theoretical argument. The sections of the talk and different case studies unfold as sacred journey. The opening of Exodus establishes the beginning and birth of the journey. The closing of Surah al-Isra follows the journey from secular to the sacred, the passage of life. The borderlands at which I pause and upon which I reflect become sacred when they are spaces of passage between the secular and the sacred. That passage is ongoing, realized through stages, each of which intensifies the sacred. Sonic and sacred borderlands, therefore, chart sacred journey as the passage of life itself, of human existence. Part 1, Sacred Journey 1, Singing the Borderland. I want to begin with sound. I've talked long enough, so it's time to hear some song. And I'm going to play for you the first 4 verses of Exodus 15. And you have here an English translation. I did all of my translations in the Revised Standard Version for the ISM. I just want to make that a little footnote here, even though I had usually put them in the King James Version, but coming to the ISM means RSV. So you're going to hear a performance from 1911, a recording of a Yemenite prayer leader. I embark on the first of the sacred journeys I trace in my reflections today at the borderlands of exile, with the 15th chapter of the book of Exodus in the Torah. Pursued by Pharaoh's army, Moses has led the Jewish people out of Egypt to the border formed by the sea. The sea, in its many geographical locations, represents a site of chaos and danger, a space that must be crossed in the course of exile and diaspora. In Exodus 15, the crossing of the sea and the passage into the borderlands of exile are realized metaphorically, materially, and musically by song itself. And it is for that reason, the intensive musicality that represents the sacred journey that follows in the Torah, that I have begun this evening with a text in which borders of all kinds converge. In this biblical text, the passage through the sea affords the ontological rise of song, the topographical source of sacred music. We witness such geographical and ontological confluence clearly in Exodus 15, known both as the Song of Moses, one of many songs of Moses, or several songs of Moses, and as the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam. For the moment, I shall not linger long on the geographical dimensions of the text's description of the sea as encumbrance and passage across the borders of exile and diaspora. Suffice it to say that these dimensions are explicit and dense in all the texts I have gathered for my reflections this evening. The metaphorical and the material are clearly evident in the Song of the Sea, but so too are the musical borders across which song moves. Quite extraordinarily, the chapter concludes with a second song, Miriam's song, which too bears remarkable ontological symbolism. As Rachel Edelstein would tell us, the ontological questions sonically posed here are those of Kol Isha, woman's voice in Jewish worship. At the broadest level, probably not everyone reads Hebrew, so I'll try a longer English translation here. At the broadest level, Exodus 15 moves between two narrative genres of songs. Indeed, in the course of its 21 verses, it crosses the borders between epic and ballad 4 times. We hear such passage clearly in the shift from the epic's stygic line-by-line structure to ballad's strophic structure. The structural transformation of vocal form is rare in the Torah, but not unknown. Significantly, in the instances when the Torah text calls forth a song, it also marks arrival in a borderland. The final song of Moses in the central text of Deuteronomy 32, in the closing chapters of the Torah, sung when Moses looks across the borders to the promised land, knowing death will overtake him before he can pass through them, is yet another case in which the move from stygic structure to ballad structure, verse structure, takes place and marks it as song. Song here also realizes the border between life and death, while at the same time bringing the epic of the Torah cycle to its close before it returns again to its beginning with Genesis. It is, finally, also noteworthy that most biblical scholars claim that the Song of the Sea was a later addition to the text of Exodus, and as such, its history as a part of the epic totality explains its formal distinctiveness, why it is a ballad I'll call it a ballad in its verse form. Shirat Hayam, moreover, circulates widely as a self-standing song outside the Torah cycle. A.Z. Edelson recorded several versions in the different variants he recorded during his 1911-1913 fieldwork in Jerusalem. For example, he recorded Samaritan and Yemenite versions, the latter of which you have just heard. The theological and exegetical basis of such arguments notwithstanding, for me, they suggest one more analytical level for understanding how borders within music function, how they divide and connect along the sacred journeys, and how they articulate the place of worship. Sacred Journey 2, number 2, Pilgrimage. Throughout my talk this evening, I draw upon what is surely the best-known theoretical framework of ritual theory, Arnold von Gennep's 3 stages in rites of passage, which were further developed by Victor Turner and others, including Edith Turner in her collaboration work with her husband on pilgrimage. The first of these is separation. The second part of the rite of passage is then the entrance into the liminal stage, the spaces in between. And third, the coming together, the gathering together in community again, called communitas. Whereas I move through sacred journeys using this model in rather straightforward fashion, deliberately seeking connectedness across the sacred journeys I follow this evening, rather than proposing new theory, I also wish to alert you to the ways similar stages are evident in the practices and concepts of worship in the different religions we shall encounter sonically this evening. From hence they went on singing, and they said, "Behold, how fitly are the stages set, for their relief that pilgrims are become, and how they us receive without one let, that make the other life our mark and home. What novelties they have, to us they give, that we, though pilgrims, joyful lives may live. They do upon us 2 such things bestow, that sure we pilgrims are, where'er we go." From John Bunyan, The Pilgrim's Progress. Pilgrimage plays a predominant role among the sacred journeys whose paths I trace through my reflections this evening. Pilgrimage establishes both the beginning and ending of sacred journey, and it binds them through repeated passage across the liminal spaces between them. Pilgrims may journey but once in a lifetime, or they may choose to undertake multiple journeys to multiple shrines and sites of worship. There are pilgrimages that take place annually. Others respond to the necessities of a moment, say the search for physical and spiritual healing. Whereas I have studied pilgrimage globally, often joining pilgrims where they travel, I go on pilgrimages, I focus in this brief section on Jerusalem pilgrimage, which not only runs as a leitmotif through my reflections today, but also exhibits particularly global dimensions. I have myself, moreover, just returned from Jerusalem only 3 weeks ago. In the longue durée of Jerusalem pilgrimage, it is the diaspora that generated the conditions for and thus sustained the liminal stage. That liminal stage intensified and magnified the centrality of Jerusalem as a site of return, another of my themes this evening, both physically and metaphorically, as well as musically. I turn briefly to the liminality of pilgrimage here because of the ways in which pilgrimage was mobilized through voice and journey. In the liminal stage, pilgrims transformed Jerusalem by reimagining and remapping it, charting its sacredness. Early Christian pilgrims imagined the physical world as finite. Santiago de Compostela was the end of the known world. From Mecca to Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem was similarly a journey to the end of the known world, or from the end of the known world, albeit as the border between the physical and the spiritual. Christian and Muslim pilgrims would thus regard Santiago and Al-Aqsa as the farthest places of worship. Let's look briefly at several maps created by pilgrims, which in turn remade the world as a place inhabited by pilgrims who were journeying. The first of these is a map of Jerusalem from about 1200. And what's interesting here is to see the way in which this mapping connects between the outside and the inside, and actually shows the mobility of the movement to and toward and through Jerusalem. We find here that the path of the pilgrim is passing from east at the top, from west at the bottom to east at the top, toward the Temple Mount. I love these maps. They're just fantastic. So I'll give you another one. Here's a different pilgrim's map, this more modern from the 19th century, and it's a pilgrim's map by a Persian Jewish pilgrim, in which the individual sites unfold successively along a geographic path pilgrims would follow. So the sacred journey is literally to be read as a series of lines, as if we're walking along the street here, quite different from that more globalized. This is a local mapping of pilgrimage spaces. Sacred Journey 3, Exile and Diaspora. Again, I'll begin with a text that I'm sure many of us know very well. It's the single text in the Bible that's set the most times musically. Psalm 137, By the Waters of Babylon. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs. And our tormentors mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? The Borderlands, and I'll provide you with an image, just to a wonderful image. Amira knows this very well. She probably actually made this originally from 2 pages of a book, so I have to give her credit for that. I'll give credit also to E.M. Lillian for this wonderful engraving from 1908. A scene of Psalm 137. The Borderlands formed of exile and lament course through Psalm 137. The psalm itself arises from a place of worship, the lands of Babylon, bounded by 2 ancient rivers, Naharaim. The rivers of Naharaim both separate and connect. They create a common space for those in captivity, a temporary homeland, a place of worship and song and its precarity. The rivers are also spaces of precarity, barriers that remind those in exile of the dangers of return. The lyres hanging along the rivers of this borderland are silent. Are the songs of worship, asked the psalmist, really those of these borderlands? Do they sing only of displacement? Or do they afford agency to the return from exile to sound the place historically sanctified by worshiping a common God. Song and the place of worship are inseparable in the 137th Psalm, so much so that we are hardly surprised recognizing that it is the biblical setting for music across time and religious traditions more often than any other. The sonic encounters along the borderlands in the 137th Psalm are as geographically evocative as they are musically diverse. Song articulates the very borders between self and other, between the foreign and the familiar, between silence and sound, ultimately between the peace of praise and the violence following the loss of voice. Song affords material substance to the place of worship. Babylon and Zion become two places in which song gives substance to worship in entirely different ways. In the modern era, Babylon retained its historical subjectivity for diaspora, specifically for the diaspora of the Baghdadi Jews across Asia. And I'll only pause briefly here. This is another moment. It's another topic for another talk, but not everyone knows the diaspora of the Baghdadi Jews who came largely with the English as they established empire in Asia. Here are their routes here. In India, they have a very present place, a special place, both in Maharashtra and in Kolkata, where I've worked, but also in Shanghai and elsewhere in China. Very, very important also musically as well. Often the Baghdadi Jews, as they're called, and they're usually called in English as Baghdadi Jews, whether in Shanghai or Kolkata. And we see, for example, this is a synagogue. This is the Beth El synagogue in Kolkata, and a wonderful synagogue in the center of one of the central bazaars in Kolkata. Here is the inside of the Ohel Rachel synagogue in Shanghai. Both of these are both my photos from time visits to these synagogues. Here is an image of Baghdadi Jews in Shanghai during World War II, where they actually were able to live in a ghetto by the Japanese who occupied Shanghai. And they were jazz musicians, and they played a special role in playing jazz. We see here the jazz band playing for an outdoor concert in the 1940s. Sacred Journey 4, Shrines. Return, metaphorical, material, and musical, is crucial to the action and agency of Sacred Journey. Return symbolizes the incompleteness of the journey. Return signifies the moment of arrival, but not that of rest. The song of return enunciates the sacredness of the place of worship, of the shrine. And it is to shrines on the sacred journey that I now return myself. I return to a particular shrine this evening for reasons that are collegial, musical, and admittedly personal. I first visited the shrine of the Durga, or mausoleum, of Nizamuddin Auliya in 2014 with your Yale colleague, Professor Amira Nimji. Amira and I had shared musical experiences together on other occasions. We were co-teachers of world music courses at the University of Chicago, and she would work with me as a research assistant for future projects. To us, it was hardly surprising that we would together strike out as ethnomusicological pilgrims in search of sonic encounter in the shrines that house the tombs of the Sufi saint Nizamuddin Auliya and the great Sufi poet and musician, the Guru saint of North Indian music, Amir Khusro. A picture of the inner shrine, the mausoleum itself, this time from 2022, from the moment of return. The shrine, a complex of spaces for prayer, worship, circumambulation, and the ecstatic music making of Qawwali, contains the borders of spiritual, particularly genealogical journey. It was that sense of return, yes, genealogically inspired by Amira, that I returned to the shrine in late December 2022. I want to share that sense of return with you tonight for the many dimensions of its confluence and intersection in music and worship. The musicians you are about to see and hear were very different from the more professional Qawwali that Amira and I encountered when we first visited the shrine. We were there on an evening dedicated to musical performance. In a certain sense, music was elevated to a sense different from the worship, although surely not separated from it. But in the return, I saw a sort of transformation, a transformation of worship in the shrine. However, and it was no less powerful as the musicians that you're about to see weave the intricate fabric of return, ensuring that the genealogy of sonic encounter at the Durgah of Nizamuddin Auliya could be experienced. And I just want to play a little bit of performance there. So these are, I wouldn't call them amateur Qawwali players, I would call them lay Qawwali players, I think is the better way to put them. And I'm going to play a little bit, but one of the things I want you to hold on to is the way in which ecstasy emerges from this performance. So this was a performance from 2022, from 2 months I would like to send a copy of this to Martin Jean, actually, for use in his performance practice class for organ. There's some fairly unique and remarkable organ techniques here in playing the harmonium. I'm going to not linger with the fifth journey. If I can even find it at all. There we go. Which, however, remains in India, historically and otherwise. I'm concerned very much with two ways of thinking about Borderlands in also some of the work I've been doing in West Bengal, in Shantiniketan, which is a wonderful place. Interested in the way in which a group of mendicant musicians called bauls actually negotiate and navigate across spaces, particularly of the area around the Birnbund district of West Bengal, in which they live. And they travel. So they make this, they make the experience through of space, of the borderland, this borderland area of West Bengal, sometimes also with those from Bangladesh, the Boyatis, through their movement, song, and ecstasy. I'm going to compare that with a mythological moment of Borderlands, one that is associated with mythologically with the foundation of India, the meeting of the armies of Krishna and Arjuna in Kurukshetra, in which music also, in the midst of an epic within an epic, plays a role. But first, I just want to let you see a bowl musician. Eben, I hope you'll like this. This is a very fine bowl musician.
যার মন ভালো নয় সে পীড়িতের মর্ম কি জানে ভোলার মন যার দিল ভালো নয় সে পীড়িতের কর্ম কি জানে দিনে দিনে বারে ও
So then he begins this movement across and through it, creating the sense of space. And the ecstasy in this performance intensifies and intensifies. A very different use of understanding of the borderlands, and particularly the Bauls move in this area, particular borderland area between West and East Bengal, and map it with an eclectic form of Vaishnavism that is very constantly changing, constantly crossing sacred borders of various kinds. The other image comes from the Bhagavad Gita, and this is the image which is the Bhagavad Gita is an epic in itself, and it's an epic within the larger epic of the Mahabharata. And here we see, again, a god associated with music, bringing his army, Krishna, to the army of Arjuna, which is the army of the physical world, and they negotiate this moment using music, using the idea of song, and realizing it in the way in which the figure of Krishna runs through many mythological stories, of course, and playing with, again, the very ideas of the origins of music, the way in which music forms within this borderland in this case. I want to be conscious of time as well. Sacred Journey 6, Bloodlands. Tomorrow, February 24th, is, as we know only too well, the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In a talk dedicated to Borderlands on the eve of that anniversary, it would be unacceptable to ignore the war in Ukraine and its long history of surviving on what Timothy Snyder so aptly has described as Europe's bloodlands. The question of sovereignty, and surely Ukraine's sovereignty, is always contingent on borderlands and their defense, often against enormous cruelty. The question I now raise is, how do such challenges to sovereignty engender song? In the historical longue durée and in the real time of the present. To search for an answer to that question, now I explore two bodies of song in Ukraine, both of which narrate the meaning of sovereignty at Ukraine's borders. Two bards sing this history into being, resonant with the narratives they intoned to sing in the Ukrainian nation in the 17th century and the 19th century. Significantly, the symbolic meaning of these ballads, of these two songs, is that of place. The borders of Ukraine form the way they form from its long history, in its east and south and in its west. My first bard. The two bards. First, a Cossack nobleman domesticated through the elevation of folk art in the 17th century, where we have this particular image here. And Werni Hora, whom you'll see in a moment, memorialized through the monumental style of the romantic Polish painter Jan Matejko. They both sing of the Ukrainian nation in styles and with national imaginaries that are as strikingly similar as they are different. The Cossack bard turns to music during a moment of rest, the emblem of his power, the horse, the scepter, ornate sword, and lavish garb, momentarily laid aside in exchange for the national instrument of Ukraine, the bandura. He plays with abandon and sings, mediating between the song that has entered his consciousness and the inscribed text written across the base of the painting itself, the soil of the nation. In the Cossack song, Ukraine is self-assured, bounded by evidence musically mustered for quintessential Ukrainianness that leaves little question about its cultural and national authenticity. The song, through its transcribed text at the Cossack bard's feet, grows from the very land of the nation, and by singing the song of Ukraine, the Cossack bard lays claim to the nation itself. The bandura is no less a product of the country, for it appears here and in imagery to the present in countless variants, each one crafted by the peasant musician who proclaims an allegiance to a collective unification through song. This is my second bard. In contrast, the epic bard, Werni Hora, displays a restless and troubled presence on the canvas. So we move now from eastern Ukraine to western Ukraine, to the borders of each. The haunting hagiography with which Matejko treats his bard and the music he imagines into being bears witness to Werni Hora's association with a different sort of mediation, the political and ideological mediation that has the potential to accumulate cultural and religious differences along national borders. And please sort of try to see this as much as you can in this painting. The centrality of song notwithstanding, flanked by symbols of Poland on the left and Ukraine on the right, Werni Hora has dropped his modern bandura, the hurdy-gurdy, sometimes called a lyra, to the rocky, infertile ground below him. The soil here is very different in the western part of the country. The centrality of song notwithstanding, Mataiko renders its contents unclear. Will it be inscribed in Polish by the Polish nobleman with notebook and pen? Or will it retain its Ukrainian character and thus its familiarity to the peasant woman and the Orthodox priest? The nation itself, embodied by Verni Hora, rising from the earth, transcends the border, overtly aspiring toward the very sacrality that envelops the bard's head in the halo of the moon. What kind of Ukrainian borderland is being sung here? I think I'll jump ahead and leave that question for the Q&A, maybe, so to save us a little bit of time. Here are some other images from singing. Sacred Journey number 7, Enlightenment and Epic. In this, I want to summarize this journey a bit because it actually takes us on a Buddhist journey. In this case, the Buddhist journey across from an epic text, usually translated as the journey to the West, and of a Buddhist monk who goes to the West and there encounters a world arising from music. It's a marvelous epic. Those of you who know this epigraph comes from the fabulous translation from my late colleague Anthony Yu. What we find with epic, though, is that it draws us to this moment of creation in Borderlands, and that's what I wanted to show with this image here. The way in which sonic encounter in the sacred moment, this place of worship as it takes place, results from these various possibilities, this convergence of journeys of materiality, musicality, and the metaphors that represent them. And we know this particularly represents the way in which encounter comes together at the sacred moment, at the moment of worship, and which then becomes sacred through it. Sacred Journey 8, Sound and the Sacred Ascent. The path of the sacred journey to the place of worship is one of ascent, metaphorically, materially, and musically. The monk in the journey to the West goes to the mountains. Pilgrims go to the mountains, of course. Upon first consideration, it may seem that the vertical movement of ascent contrasts with or even contradicts the horizontal dimensions of the borderland. Once again, I want to suggest it is in the ways ascent and border passage form what I call contrapuntal topographies that journey becomes sacred. Different and distinctive registers of temporality emerge from such topographies. The containment by history of the borderlands, the movement against the materiality of the earthly. Ascent, however, strips time of its boundedness, freeing it from the earthly. The sacralization through a journey of ascent runs as a common theme through the Abrahamic faiths. For example, in the ways pilgrimage shapes similar forms of journey in the worship and belief practices of local histories. In search of the Abrahamic faiths, and I should say for pilgrimage in other religions as well, the metaphors of ascent to a spiritual world from physical materiality is critical. In Judaism, ascent, aliyah, provides metaphors for rising to the mountains, to Jerusalem. Pilgrimage, therefore, is most often called the aliyah l'regel in Hebrew. Within the Psalms, there is a corpus of psalms called the Psalms of Ascent, the Shirei HaMa'alot. The historical and political meanings of Aliyah are well known to many here this evening. To make Aliyah in English is to become a citizen of Israel for immigrants. Ascent was no less important to the Christian church fathers. For example, in St. Augustine's Civitas Dei, wherein the higher of the two cities of God represents the division between the earthly and the heavenly. The Christian pilgrimage moves from the life of the flesh, then, in Augustine's imaginary, to the life of the spirit in the city of God. In Islam, the physical and spiritual journey of the Prophet Muhammad in a single night to what is now the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, with further ascent to heaven, described in the Quran in the surah known as Al-Isra, and given specific details in the Hadith, the accounts of the Prophet's life, is a journey of ascent. I shall return to Al-Isra as a place of worship and passage in a moment when I arrive at my conclusion. The contrapuntal geography of the sacred in ascent, moreover, is encapsulated, quite literally heightened, by music. The complex musical and aesthetic ways in which the musical heightens the sacred in the Black church is one of the most important theoretical formulations in the work of Braxton Shelley. Braxton has developed a rich vocabulary for the different ways in which sacred song realizes ascent, and ascent realizes sacred song. The vamp, think of those of you who know Braxton's work, his concepts, the vamp, tuning up, tuning in, transduction, melodic rise to the upper octave, eternal song. All these are movements, and critically movements, of ascent. Musical ascent thus reroutes the sacred journey through ecstasy. Ecstasy, in turn, is mobilized by music, the embodied performance of ascent to the sacred. Let's witness such ascent through ecstasy in a brief video from my field research in Jerusalem, a moment of worship at Golgotha, in which a Christian pilgrim reaches the final stage of the journey of ascent. And again, this is will come from my own field work. No, it's inside. It's blocked off from the grave side.
Oh, thank you, Jesus. 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 I give you praise. I give you praise. I give you thanks. Oh, you are so good. Thank you for answering me, Lord. Thank you for answering me through rushing power, through the blood of Jesus. Thank you, Jesus Christ. Thank you, Jesus.
I again present this as an idea to show the way in which ecstasy results from this notion of ascent, the ascent even from text, he has a Bible in his hand, to song, to the melodic realization of his worship.
سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده.
Sacred Journey 9, my final sacred journey of the evening. Journey to the Farthest Place of Worship. Let me begin with an epigraph. This is the opening ayat, verse of the Surah Al-Isra.
سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير سبحان الذي
Leave you with the text. It is particularly fitting that we journey with Surah Al-Isra, the 17th Surah of the Quran, as I draw toward the close of my reflections this evening. Al-Isra, most often translated as the night journey in English, takes as its point of departure already in the opening ayat the most sacred of journeys, that of the Prophet from Mecca to the mosque in Jerusalem, which would become the farthest place of worship before he ascended to heaven. Al-Isra is a surah constituted of borderlands, which are surrounded in ayat after ayat, verse after verse, in the recitation of 111 verses. Many of these borderlands are those we've encountered elsewhere in the journeys we've followed this evening. For example, the story of Moses leading the people of Israel across the Red Sea is found in Al-Isra. The ascent to Jerusalem, the call of believers to the time and place of worship. The sonic markers of Quranic recitation once again draw us to the borders at which the faithful gather in community as a body of believers. The most remarkable of the borderlands traversed by the Prophet Muhammad and those who hear the word of God, of Allah, in the revealed text of the Quran is that of the night journey itself. Muhammad's ascent from the places of earthly worship to those beyond. The continuation of the journey beyond the physical, where it becomes even more intensely sacred. The borderlands of Al-Isra are metaphorically and materially many, but their confluence in the 17th chapter of the Quran rises because of the musicality of recitation, which too reveals the complex ontology of sacred voice in Islam. The borderlands of the farthest place of worship do far more than articulate symbol and ontology. The worship to which they give voice unfolds along the journey across the borderlands of human life and spirit. The ascent to the farthest places of worship, to which I have tried to draw us closer to the journeys I have followed with you in the Tangeman lecture this evening. Thank you very much.
Given that I've taken some of your time by too long an introduction, I'll just be brief and open up the floor to conversation and let you moderate it if you.
Sure. Yes, please.
Yes. Why don't you mention any words of Tirthayatra? Actually, because you mentioned a while ago, India. So the essence of your speech here, going journey to green like that, that's called Tirthayatra, so going far away that to worship. So why you don't use that word tirtayatra?
Oh, I certainly could have. I made certain choices to fit into 9 sacred journeys, and I didn't always perhaps make the ones that will. This will, of course, even in the long version, which of this, which I went rather quickly through a few sacred journeys. I will be very keen to include and think about precisely such moments. Thank you very much for
As far as I know, that's the most authentic word to your title, tirtayatra.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your.
Thank you.
How can I get your? Can I copy of your that one?
Well, there is. I don't know. Is the live stream available as a recording? Yes, that's probably the best way to do it.
It'll be on our website.
Oh, on the website. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm curious to ask because I'm now taking a theological aesthetics class, and then we talked about how music and the arts can sort of act as a ladder to the sacred. And I wonder, when you talk about border, is that sacred encounter sustained by the music, or is there a certain point where actually it's about going beyond to a silence or a kind of
Indeed. I have had one of those journeys that I had to move through quickly because of time was that of Buddhism and Sufism, in which I sort of traced the ideas of the ladder of ascent according to the sort of the idea that is, and this is the idea of the meditation levels, jhana, in Buddhism, and here you have the idea of, again, a movement from the sphere of sense desires, of our physical desires, eventually coming to a sphere of formlessness, and it's doing exactly that sort of thing. It's similar for the way in which this is an idea of Sufism, and the way in which these sort of different levels or stages here are transformed into. And what I like about this is that you have this idea in Sufism. You actually have kind of a theological or sacred idea here, but that it actually relates specifically to ideas of ladder or place in the idea of maqam or mode as well. And again, it moves to this point in which the experiences are, in a sense, beyond, across the border. Similarly, this is Martin Buber's ideas of the 10 steps of Hasidim in Judaism. So what's striking about it, and I include all of these because in some ways they reflect each other. I mean, they show us similar ideas, sort of moving toward and then beyond. And this is where the question of sacred and song form a border themselves. Thank you. Please.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation, Mr. Bohlman. You were going to ask us some questions about a particular painting early on, or you were going to pose a question of the painting of the hurdy-gurdy.
Yeah. The Verni Hora.
Yeah. I was wondering if you might. I'm curious because I'm really drawn in by the painting.
It's a remarkable painting. I mean, it's a very So the figure of Verne Hora is known as a sort of trickster figure in Ukrainian folklore, a border crosser, literally somebody who straddles the border. This is a romantic painter from the 19th century who was realizing it. And what's incredible about it, what I wanted to just sort of pointing out the ways in which you see, different figures doing this here. You have the Orthodox priest, for example, on the Ukrainian side, the way in which literacy, and I was wondering what you noticed. I've looked at this painting so many times, but I don't always see the things that may jump out at you. It took me a long time to think about the halo. I thought it was the moon.
Something that struck me, apart from Verne Hora inhabiting a liminal space,
Yes.
both sides, is just the way the hurdy-gurdy falls onto the ground, backwards, the way he is positioned. So conventionally, the crank and the wheel are turned by the right hand, and not in the way that this would suggest here, unless there's some other technique. But so in a way, the keyboard faces the Ukrainian side.
Yes.
Or he's facing.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Thank you. I knew I'd get to tell. Who else has something to tell me about?
Well, when I look at it, it seems that he's almost going into a trance. He's being
Yes.
possessed.
Yeah.
And falling, and they're supporting him as he's in this
Yeah.
trance.
Yeah.
It reminds me of trances that I've seen.
Absolutely.
People have to support him.
I mean, even this gesture. If I sort of put all of I could create a little group of images from this evening. The gesture of raising. Remember the Cavalli player, who was also, he wasn't playing a hurdy-gurdy, but he was playing a modern instrument, a harmonium, which came, of course, with Christian missionaries, and is now standard in Cavalli and in other forms of Hindustani music, North Indian music. But he's doing the same sort of gesture when he raises his voice. The bowl, the same thing. The use of this, that the gesture is really as a means of leading the body. I mean, we're talking here about embodiment of song, really, and that's what the trance does. Of course, it's a moment of releasing from the body, and that in it. Thank you for noticing that, Amira.
I had an observation and then I had a question. The observation was that, when I look at images of Hindu deities, for example, objects are sometimes strewn on the floor or at the feet of a deity to indicate some sort of aspect of one of their persona functions, right? And so it kind of reminded me immediately that there's this hurdy-gurdy on the floor to indicate something about this person who's elevated. Not to say that he's named to a deity, but that there's some sort of symbolic function that is contained in this instrument that is to tell us more about how we function as a persona, as a presiding persona. That was just an immediate.
Very interesting. Yeah. I've tried to follow this hurdy-gurdy to a sort of a modern form. I mean, hurdy-gurdies are still used in Ukraine and for them, and in Poland as well, but with accordions, because again, it's the machinery. What interests me is that it's this kind of machinery that is on the floor. But look at this soil. Yeah. It's not fertile. I mean, it's rocky and it's troubled. It's troubled. Western Ukraine. I mean, this is is a mountainous area. Anywhere in the borderlands with Poland.
I see the moon as well because I see this kind of face of the moon in Tibet, and then there's bats. So is it nighttime? That's really interesting.
please.
So you left off in answering the last question on embodiment and thinking about the body, and that was what I was thought with when you led us through this journey from 1 to 9. And I think of the sort of micro examples you give in each case, where it's something like halalu or the practice of ecstasy is meant to transform the body. So is there a larger narrative about what happens to the body from the beginning to the end? Is the body transformed in this ascent? And might you comment a little bit on how that works in this really beautiful way you've architected this talk?
I mean, one place that we find it, did everybody hear the question?
Sorry, I have small voice.
You might repeat it into the microphone in case people online.
Yeah, I should stand here. Sorry about that. Amira was asking about the question of embodiment. Is there a way in which this is in the performance and in the song itself, actually that embodiment yeah. I mean, one example I would give, which will be familiar to, I think, most of us, is the example of dervishes. I mean, Sufism, where you have the idea of actually transforming the body through the repetition of the name of God, and hyperventilating. I mean, literally bringing too much oxygen into the body, which is desirous. I mean, it's what brings one higher to precisely to the God whose name you are articulating. And I think, and I mean, that's an example that we've all seen in one form or another. I mean, Sufi concepts use this a lot. I mean, this is exactly what when we see, we see the physical transformations of these performers as well. And some of the famous ones who are well known, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, for example, we will watch him, his body goes through transformation by the end of a performance. And this is what Hasidic Jews want to do too. I mean, this is the idea of dance. Dance is really critical here because here's the way in which song and sound engage the body, actually enter the body and engage in that process of transformation. Amir is a dancer, for those of you who don't know, and I wish upon you the opportunity to see her.
Last question.
Okay. I have a question also about the architecture of your journeys, which I found very evocative all the way through, and I was interested in the fact that you started with Exodus and you end with the Ascension, the night journey of Mohammed, and I can think of lots of reasons for structuring it that way, but I wondered why you chose those beginning and ending.
A number of reasons. First of all, one is associated in the if I'll call it in the broadest or sort of the basis sense. One is with birth, the birth of exile, right? The moment in which the exile begins, the exodus begins, and then it's this incredible journey and becomes a journey itself. But it's a journey that moves toward Jerusalem and never reaches it in the epic of the Torah. The Torah is an epic text. It uses so Jerusalem plays a role in this as well, and Jerusalem plays a role in Al-Isra, but in a different way at the end of the journey. So literally, my journeys also had Jerusalem as a place is this incredible borderland itself, right? But framed from these other places of borderlands. The Al-Isra, it's the journey from Mecca, from the mosque in Mecca to the farthest mosque in Jerusalem. So that was why I did it. That was why I did it. Trying to give that. So if I can put it this way, all 9 journeys then realized a single journey in a rhetorical sense from beginning of the journey to the end of the journey.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In this intimate setting, I sort of feel kind of like one of your graduate students getting to sit with you in a seminar, take a journey through a course. And I wish I would have had that opportunity at some point, but this is the next best thing. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you all. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.